The tragic legacy of Vietnam is shared by John F. Kennedy, Lyndon Johnson, and Richard Nixon. But Cold War diplomats like George Kennan, Henry Kissinger, Zbigniew Brzezinski, and Brent Scowcroft served both Republican and Democratic presidents alike, and their central focus across 5 decades, a commitment to toppling an evil empire responsible for the deaths of millions of its own citizens, ultimately proved to be a moral campaign that required great skill and endless fortitude. Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush may have expedited and managed the Cold War's end, but it was Harry Truman whom history called upon to engage the Soviet Union in a struggle for world supremacy during a time when most Americans were war-weary and exhausted by their role in resolving the endless tragedies of 20th century Europe. Truman knew ignoring Stalin's expansion across Central Europe was as unwise as the appeasing of Hitler's advances across that same continent a decade earlier. And yet, like his predecessor, Franklin Roosevelt, in the lead-up to World War II, Truman faced resistance from Republicans in Congress and progressives in his own party. Worse yet, many of Truman's own allies considered the new president ill-equipped to confront Soviet expansionism and lead America through the post-war crisis it would soon confront. The journalist and historian Herbert Agar called Truman a strange little man. And others shared that harsh assessment when the former Missouri senator assumed the presidency after Franklin D. Roosevelt's death in April 1945. Just 20 years earlier, the failed businessman had been defeated in his bid for re-election as county judge back home in Independence. The machine backing Truman thought so little of him that party bosses only allowed him to campaign for the United States Senate in 1934 after their first 4 choices refused to run. Even after a surprising win, the New York Times dismissed the incoming senator as a rube. Truman would spend the next 6 years absorbing a steady stream of abuse while championing FDR's New Deal agenda. But his unremitting loyalty was not returned by the Democratic president, who refused to campaign for Truman's re-election bid or even endorse him. The St. Louis Dispatch dismissed Truman as a dead cock in the pit in that re-election battle against a popular Missouri governor. But Harry Truman would run and win as an underdog again, and once more shock Washington insiders who shared the Dispatch's grim take on his chances. That would be far from the last time the 5'9" commoner, with an explosive temper and poor eyesight, exceeded all the low expectations placed upon his narrow shoulders. 4 years after refusing to endorse Truman's re-election bid, a dying Roosevelt glumly selected the unrefined senator as his vice presidential pick in 1944. An FDR aide later admitted, "We chose Truman because all of us were tired." Roosevelt's own chief of staff, Admiral William Leahy, brusquely asked his boss during those deliberations, "Who the hell is Harry Truman?" The media's reaction was no less caustic. Time magazine responded to Truman's nomination by describing him as the mousy little man from Missouri. Others mocked FDR's VP choice as the second Missouri Compromise. Even after Harry S. Truman's elevation to the White House, the slights continued. To err is Truman was a jab Republicans and Democrats alike used to target a politician who, at times, seemed hopelessly overmatched by the challenges confronting his presidency. My own family, who suffered through the darkest days of the Great Depression in rural Georgia, survived those desperate times because of Roosevelt's New Deal. A picture of FDR hung on my grandmother's wall until she died at the age of 93, a half-century after Roosevelt's own death. And yet my mom remembered with a laugh her poor rural family mocking the lack of abilities exhibited by fellow